a button that appears. Okay, so here we go. You have to click got it to acknowledge that you know that this is being recorded, but you are not going to be recorded because you're not going to be on camera. Welcome to Defying Ageism. Honor Roll is very excited to feature this special talk with Ashton Applewhite, moderated by Nancy Giles. I'm reading this because I know I'm going to forget things, so I'll try to make it somewhat brisk. We thank them both profusely for being with us this evening. I'm Olga Humphrey, one of the executive committee members of Honor Roll, along with Cynthia Cooper, Cheryl Davis, and Jacqueline Reingold. We've decided to invite some other writers groups this evening and have members of the WGA West's Career Longevity Committee, as well as members of the League of Professional Women in Theater and the International Center for Women Playwrights, among others. We want to give a special thanks to Honor Roll member Lisa Pelican, who graciously offered to run Zoom for us. And also thanks to Jackie and Cindy, who also were involved in the planning, and Cindy especially for handling a lot of reservations. We're welcoming questions, many questions, we hope, and you will place them in the chat box. Now, what we would like you to do is just put the word question all in caps as the very first thing, so that when Nancy scrolls, it'll be easy for her to find questions rather than other comments or links that people might do. So please put your question, have that word right in front and make it all caps so it's really easy to find for Nancy. Before we get to the main event, we'd like to remind everyone of Honor Roll's mission statement, which we always read at any of our events. Honor Roll is an advocacy and action group of women plus playwrights over 40 and our allies, whose goal is our inclusion in theater. We are the generation excluded at the outset of our careers because of sexism, now overlooked because of ageism. We celebrate diversity in theater and advocate for its definition to include age alongside gender, race, ethnicity, faith, socioeconomic status, disability, and sexual orientation. We seek parity in production, publication, and development opportunities. We're fundamentally a grassroots organization, and our members volunteer to do, events or, other actions that would benefit all the members. If you're interested in becoming a member of Honor Roll, then you can get in touch with us at honorrollmembers@gmail.com and just say, how do I become a member? Now, to our guest and moderator. An internationally, and I'm sorry, Lisa, we're recording, right? I totally spaced out on that. Are we recording now? Yes, we're good. Okay. I think I did click the record button, so we did. An internationally recognized expert on ageism, Ashton Applewhite is the author of This Chair Rocks, a manifesto against ageism, a co-founder of the Old School Anti-Ageism Clearinghouse. She speaks widely at venues that have included the TED main stage and the United Nations, and is at the forefront of the emerging movement to raise awareness of ageism and to dismantle it. In 2022, the Decade of Healthy Aging, a UN plus WHO collaboration, the Decade of Healthy Aging, a UN plus WHO collaboration named Ashton one of the Healthy Aging 50 leaders transforming the world to be a better place to grow older. Nancy Giles, our moderator, is an Emmy award-winning contributor to CBS News Sunday Morning and tries to be witty on various political panels on MSNBC. She's acted in films, on TV, part of the ensemble cast of China Beach and the sitcom Delta, and most recently was off Broadway in the new group's Good for Otto by David Rabe. Giles is a Theater World Award winner, has written and performed solo shows, and is working on a collection of essays and true stories. She is a longtime volunteer with New York City's 52nd Street Project, working with kids from the Hell's Kitchen neighborhood in visual and performing arts workshops, classes, and performances. Her podcast, The Giles Files, is available wherever you listen to podcasts. Now, here are Ashton and Nancy.
Thank you so much, Olga. Welcome, everybody that's out there listening, and especially welcome, Ashton. I have to say straight up how much I loved your TED Talk and how logical it was. And at the same time, it was like a brick to the head, because I realized my own ageism. And for the record, I'm 62 and alive and happy about it. Can you tell us how you found this as an area that needed to be discussed, unshamed, unpacked? Where did you find this calling?
Well, I got older, and that'll do it. I mean, if that did it, then everyone would be anti-ageist, of course. But it's about 15 years ago. I was in my mid-50s, and it dawned on me that this getting older thing was, happening to me. And I realized I was really apprehensive about it. And I'm nerdy, so I approached it. I approached it the way I had when I was getting divorced 20 years earlier, and learned that 2/3 of divorces were initiated by women. I was like, why don't I know that? Exactly. And it's a really, I will give a less rambling answer if you want me to talk about the similar germs of these two things, the two serious books I've written. But I started to interview people over 80 and learn about longevity. And what I realized very, very soon was that everything I thought I knew about what it was like to be really old was flat out wrong or way off base, definitely not nuanced enough. And so I got a bee in my bonnet, to say the least, about why we don't know these things. And we don't know these things about aging because we live in a, shocker, sexist, capitalist, ageist patriarchy. And those are the same factors why the message, I'm going to do it anyway, all the messaging around how horrible it is going to be for women if you divorce. There are real challenges to both these things, of course, but we only hear the negative because if these things are problematized, we can be pitted against each other, and we can be persuaded to buy and do things that are not good for us, that we don't need. So that's the sexist piece of us. And then 20 years later, along came the ageist piece of it, which is, of course, deeply intertwined with the two together, gendered ageism.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, one of my favorite quotes of yours is, you can't make money off of satisfaction. That shame and fear create markets. And it occurred to me, of course, if we were all happy with how we looked and didn't feel like we had to fight against age, that would kill $1 billion industry. And wow.
$1 billion. Yeah. And even the health stuff, there are health related challenges, of course. And I'm not saying, I'm not a doctor, whether you should or shouldn't go to the doctor, but when, natural transitions are pathologized, or for example, if you can't remember where you put your keys and you think, oh my God, I have Alzheimer's, that not only is that anxiety bad for us, I'm happy to talk about the health reasons ageism is bad for us, but then you go and buy, brain training kits or whatever, as an example, and all they do is make you good at brain training games.
I'm embarrassed to say that I have fallen victim to buying some brain training medicine because the girl who was on Blossom and then was on The Big Bang Theory is the spokesperson, and she's really smart. And I too have been starting to forget things. And you talk a lot about how the stress of these things can actually make these things worse. Can you elaborate?
Yeah, I mean, I thank you for your candor. We all do these things. If someone persuasive was working with me, I'd probably buy whatever they were selling too. Seriously, I mean, and I don't want to say, who knows, maybe, You don't know until you've tried it. But the World Health Organization launched a global campaign to combat ageism last year. And it's not the World Old People Organization, right? Because they realized that the biggest challenge to good health in late life is age bias, starting between our ears. So thank you for acknowledging your own at the beginning. And of course, it's deeply entrenched in medicine. It's entrenched like sexism in all these policies and procedures around us. My favorite, there's a terrific book by Becca Levy at Yale, who's done most of the research on how attitudes towards aging affect how our minds and bodies function. It's called, I'm looking at it on my shelf, Breaking the Age Code. And she writes about this. The subtitle is How Your Beliefs About Aging Shape How Well and How Long You Will Live. And she is a cautious academic. I've known her for a long time. And I'm like, Becca, come out and say something political, say something about ageism. And she's, and she, boy, did she.
But she certainly did.
All the evidence. And my favorite of her studies establishes that people who are less ageist, she says people with a more positive attitude towards aging. I say people with a more accurate attitude towards aging, because I don't want it to sound like happy talk. And the scary shit is real. You know, we need to acknowledge that too. But people who have looked at aging, learned more about it, and are therefore less ageist, because we're also terrified,
right,
are less likely to get Alzheimer's, even if they have the gene that predisposes them to the disease.
So our
And
attitude,
the theory, to get back to your question, is that it is acts as a buffer against stress. The stress of living in a society that tells you should shut up and shuffle off stage, just as the stress of dealing with racism and sexism is why Black women have such poor health outcomes, poorer than white women, independent of class. Stress, stress, stress.
Yeah, stress is very, very, very powerful. And again, that's something that can be monetized as well. I mean,
Right.
I've fallen victim to it.
And entrenched bias in the systems we're dealing with.
Absolutely. So another thing that really stunned me about your talk was how early this kind of ageist programming starts in our lives. Can you elaborate?
Or especially for women.
For women especially.
I mean, I've started saying about women in the workforce, we are never the right age, right? And of course, it applies to any workforce, in different ways in creative industries, of course. But first, you're too young and sexy, right, to be taken seriously. And then you're too fertile to get promoted or be given responsibilities. And then boom, you're not fertile or sexy. Right? That's all she wrote.
Right.
And of course, girls in this culture are sexualized starting, who knows when, puberty, if we're lucky, right? And they are ushered off the stage, it can be 10 years later. Actresses, you are an actor. You know how short that fuse, is. And even children's books and Disney movies have all sorts of bias encoded in them. The passive granny, the wicked stepmother, all those messages also start, the messaging starts early. And unless we stop to question it, it becomes part of our identity.
Why is it so harsh against women? Why is it that men still seem to be able to age gracefully in society and women aren't given that opportunity when we have so much more to offer, among other things?
There are lots of reasons. There's a wonderful writer named Cynthia Rich who wrote a book called Look Me in the Eye, Old Woman, with her partner, Barbara. I can't remember Barbara's last name, but it was the first book about the intersection of ageism and sexism. And I just want to say that every resource I mention is available in a site I co-created called the Old School Anti-Ageism Clearinghouse, oldschool.info. So you can find them all there, including Look Me in the Eye, Old Woman. And she says the harshest forms of misogyny are reserved for very old women. If I were to get woo-woo about it, I would say it is about our power. Think about witches. Think about what happened to midwives in the Middle Ages. Think about how women with power have always been pushed, to the side and burned at the stake, not just lost your job,
Jesus, yeah.
by, I mean, I'm oversimplifying here, but I feel like I'm talking to a really, well-educated and aware, audience, so I can skip some things. We live under patriarchy, news to all of you. We're a woman's and if we subscribe to its terms, our value is very much linked to our conventional physical attractiveness, which is about youthfulness, and to our reproductive capacity. So, and men don't have that, those two barriers. However, ageism does come to bite men in the butt eventually. For white men, ageism in the workplace is often the first form of bias they've ever encountered. So, and I mean, it is much harder for women because of intersectionality, and harder again, for women of color and so on, but no one escapes it. And another important point is that ageism is any judgment on the basis of age, including you're too young. Older people experience much more of it because we're such a youth obsessed society, but young people, it casts a shadow across our entire life.
I have to ask you, as a woman of color, I feel like there's sort of a double whammy that we get. In some ways, we're seen as this kind of workhorse entity that can continue long and hard and continue to do, like, take care of people's kids and do labor way beyond what a white woman can do. And then on the other hand, since the opportunities are less and the pay can be less, we can also be sort of tossed aside if we get too old. It seems to happen both ways. Have you done any studies about that? What's your finding?
I have not studied that in particular. I know that to be the case, and I have learned, over the last 10 years that much of the discourse of second wave feminism was deeply racist.
Thank you for saying that. I appreciate you saying that. It needs to be said. And
I have a whole long, I'll also say that I have been thinking out loud about all this for 15 years on my website, which is thischairrocks.com. And you can go to the blog, thischairrocks.com/blog. And I have a long piece that I wrote in the last year about learning from the mistakes of the women's movement, which was racist, which was homophobic. Lavender menace was a term coined by Betty Friedan. Disability wasn't even on the menu, but the whole discourse of working women and leaning in was based on a middle-class white woman's choices that were never available, just like Social Security wasn't even available to farm workers, to domestic workers. So the system is stacked in all these ways against white women, and stacked in additional ways against women of color.
I just have to interject by saying the questions are already flying in. Plus, I've got pages in front of me, and this is I don't want to say it's an H issue, except it is. When I printed up the questions, the print is so small I can barely see it. So I got this little, flashlight or whatnot. Let's see. There's a question that we've got here. What are the compelling, persuasive arguments for shifting the culture?
Oh my gosh, hang on. I found that blog post, and
oh, good. Are you gonna?
I don't want to, I will say it all there and more accurately than I will in a stumbling paraphrase here, but it's something.
And you put the link in the chat, I see.
I just put it in the chat.
Yeah. There've been lots of good links put in the chat, including I think your website and whatnot. And to everyone who's doing that and has the capability, thank you. That's great. But what would the advantages be, I guess, to make a change in the culture, to change? It's a big question, and it's not going to be easy.
Well,
but
I'll give you a big answer, and then we can drill down to the more specific. So humans everywhere are living longer than ever before. And in the Paleolithic era was the first time that our hominid ancestors evolved to have 3 living generations. And that is when art happened. That is when civilization started to happen. It's probably also when capitalism started showing up. So not everything was so great. But there's a theory called the grandmother hypothesis, which is gendered, needless to say, but that it was the additional social capital of older people holding knowledge and perhaps keeping the, baby Neanderthals out of the fire while the grown-up Neanderthals went and, stabbed mammoths or whatever, but that having a third living generation was enormously valuable to the evolution of our species. In your and my lifetime, 4 and 5 living generations are becoming commonplace. Millions more healthy, well-educated adults than ever before in human history. That's an astonishing achievement. If you drink only the ageist Kool-Aid, that is my least favorite, metaphor, which you may or may not have heard, the gray tsunami. All these
I have heard that. Yeah.
incapacitated old people coming to suck all the good shit out to sea, live too long and spend it all so that our, the people who follow behind us don't get anything. Right. And there are real, real challenges to scaling up the support that population aging will require, specifically around ability and ableism, which is not the same as age and ageism, because not every older person runs out of money and, ceases to be able to look after themselves by any means. And don't get me started on the whole idea that older people are not productive. But so there is that. We need to challenge this one-sided narrative if we are going to make the most of what the new longevity has to offer. And we're not going to do it without grassroots culture change like the women's movement. Think if and it's even broader because everyone ages, right? It is,
or you die.
or you die. I know. I used to say beats the alternative until I realized all that really meant was that the only thing worse than being old was being dead.
Oh, I see. So you had to reframe that
anymore either. But but you know what I do say, Nancy, is nobody wants to be any younger, no matter how terrified we are. And think about that, even in a society that, that disparages you, that diminishes you, that renders you invisible. We know that our years are what make us us. And no one want, they go, oh, that'd be great. Actually, I don't want to wipe the slate clean because I am what I am because of everything I've experienced. And I think for a lot of women, later life is the best time of all.
It's so interesting that you say that. Yes. It's funny, just as I don't act as much, but as a performer and a writer and someone who's meeting a lot of people because of interviews and just life experience, losing my parents, losing some siblings, things that didn't happen when I was younger. I feel like I have so much more to offer to anything that I do. I have a wealth of knowledge that I didn't have when I was maybe quote unquote cuter and thinner in my 20s and 30s. And it feels like that isn't valued in this country. My question is, and this goes along with the question that one of our listeners asked, have you looked into the different attitudes toward aging in other countries?
I haven't conducted any primary research. People tend to sort of look wistfully eastward toward a hypothetical, Asian land, and ask if it isn't better somewhere else where there is less ageism, unsurprisingly, where people live in mixed age communities, just like there's less racism in racially integrated communities. It's really hard to hang on to a stereotype about any group of people when you're run up against members who look like that, and they're different from each other, right? So that's just common sense. There are countries with the tradition of Confucianism, which has a filial piety, tradition of filial piety, where the children are really almost, where they are culturally obligated to venerate their parents. Ancestor worship, those are things. And those are societies that venerate their older members. They are becoming less and less common as global capitalism busts up small communities. Urbanization, industrialization are all forces that that tend towards age segregation, and also to start to value people in terms of conventional earning capacity, which is which of course benefits To
younger.
paraphrase, thin white men, first of all, and then the less white and the less thin and the less male and so on you are, the more burdened you are by that discourse. I want to point out, though, that not all a stereotype can be benevolent as well as negative. It's still a stereotype. And
Can you explain that a little?
Yeah. Old people are wise. That's a stereotype. Some old people are wise. Some old people are idiots.
That's right.
Right. I mean, I think wisdom does map to some degree to experience. So more, if you put all the old wise people in the world, as if we could agree on who they were, in a baseball field, more of them would be older than younger, but we have all met the wise child, right? So that trope is an ageist stereotype too. And I don't think that, I mean, it aggravates me when someone stands up in a, meeting and says, I'm 108 and everyone claps. I don't think you get up to be I don't think living to be 108 or being old is in itself a notable achievement for which you deserve special respect. I think everyone deserves respect. And I actually want a world where we acknowledge age, we're not ashamed of it, but where we give it, we in an ageist world, paradoxically, we give it more credit than it deserves.
That would be that. I think that would help balance the playing field.
And it just isn't, we think it's much more responsible for affinity and what we have in common with people than is the case because society is so age segregated.
Mm-hmm.
We spent more time with mixy-uppy groups, then that belief, I think, would erode, because I don't think it's the case. I think it's a function of age segregation.
I agree. In fact, one of the questions that I had was, would it help older people, quote unquote, to make younger friends? I could see it benefiting both sides.
Both ways.
In my community, my very best friend is 94, but I think it was 5 or 6 years ago, just because of a little bit of a memory lapse and a little accident, like a person, what am I trying to say? Like a little defecation issue. Her daughter whisked her away from her home and put her in a beautiful, very wealthy, what is it called? Yes. And I've seen Elsie in the time that she's been there decline, because except for the staff, she's around a lot of people her age, very nice, but I don't get a chance to sit and talk to her like I used to. We used to do the Sunday New York Times crossword puzzle. That kind of age discrimination is not healthy, is it?
Well, there's two things happening here. I mean, in this subject, age touches on everything.
It does, yes.
Aging is not something annoying that old people do. It is how we move through life. We are aging from the minute we're born. So there's no philosophical or biological or cultural or social or economic issue that doesn't have an angle here. So the most important component of a good old age, 15 years ago, I would have said health, obviously. And then I would have said, well, wealth, because money can buy you the things you need. It's not that either. It's having a solid social network. Now, but your friend is at least in a place surrounded by other people.
Right.
So it's not like, this whole discourse around aging in place or aging independently is often a perfect recipe for isolation, which is not so great. So one question is, and I do not mean to denigrate your friend, whom I'm sure is wonderful, but the world is full of older people who won't go to the senior center because of all the old people there.
Yes, you're right.
She didn't internalized ageism, so that could be part of it. But back to your there's so many directions. I want to tell you all the things.
Of course.
Making friends of all ages is really, 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 really important.
Right.
And just because partly, there are only two inevitable bad things about getting older. Some part of your body is going to fall apart. Cognitive decline is not inevitable, and you're going to lose people you've known all your life. So from a purely pragmatic view, it comforts me, because I do have quite a few younger friends that I'm not, they're going to outlive me.
Right.
And that comforts me, right? But also making a significantly younger or older friend is in itself an anti-ageist act. What's nutty is that it seems like a radical or hard thing to do.
Mhm.
But I know, although my friend cohort is very age diverse and very queer, it's still pretty white. So I don't mean to be blasé about how hard it can be to reach across divisions of this sort, especially class.
Yes.
We have to be conscious about it and make an effort. But it is really, I want to mention before we finish consciousness raising and consciousness raising groups, because that's a way women have an advantage here because we talk to each other.
We do talk to each other. You just mentioned class, and can we talk a little bit about how
There's no class in
ageism?
America. I don't know
Yeah.
how that slipped out. We definitely can't talk about
Oh
that.
my gosh, but definitely. I mean, it kind of it has a way of unifying all races, all sexual preferences, all everything. But in terms of aging, how does class affect people as they get older?
The premise of intersectionality. Can I assume that everyone on the call knows what intersectionality is? It's a clumsy word coined by legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw because she had a friend who felt she was being discriminated against on the job. Kimberly is Black, and the woman, her friend, was Black, and she said, "I'm being discriminated against because I'm a woman and because I'm Black."
Mm-hmm.
And the law does not like that. It wants a single thing to focus on. And that was the sort of genesis of Crenshaw coming up with this idea, this concept, which is grown broadly accepting, that different identities convey different kinds of privilege in different settings, and that each of us is, and that they intersect, they reinforce, they compound each other. But each of us, in a long-winded answer to your question, is a unique intersection of identities. So you could not have much money, and I do not mean to romanticize the lack of resources or poverty, but live in a close-knit community where you maybe grow your own food, and those are recipes, and have a lot of connections to aging well, although your socioeconomic status would be higher than someone who has access to fancy medicines and fancy gyms and fancy other things. So the answer always to this, to any question of this, as I know is that it is an utterly unique experience in terms of physical capacity. I was never athletic. I sure can't run anymore. I can still walk really fast, but I don't miss the loss of athletic capacity the way an athlete would. Right. For example, but some other loss that I have, if you're super invested in looking a certain way and you look different, that's a bigger loss for someone than someone else. So it does depend. But in terms of diversity, a really interesting thing, I think, is that the longer we live, the more different from one another we become. All stereotypes are ridiculous, of course, but especially when it comes to age because of that. And if you think about it, every newborn is unique, but 17-year-olds have way more in common developmentally, socially, physically than 37-year-olds, and so on out. Mm-hmm. So it's impossible to generalize about the experience of a bunch of 8-year-old Cub Scouts, right, in Duluth, but it's really impossible to generalize. And the older the person, the less their age says about what they are capable of physically, cognitively, socially. So generalizing on the basis of age, always a mistake, but it grows more and more of a guess the older the person. Did that make sense?
I totally understand. I appreciate actually you putting the intersectionality aspect in the mix, which it always should be, because my friend who's in a very well-kept, it costs a lot of money, senior home, and there are people that she interacts with and whatnot, but I can tell that because Elsie's not living in our community and seeing people, she's diminishing, and it's costing her a lot of money. Whereas someone who might not have her resources, that's living maybe in a multifamily home with grandkids and daughters and sons and might not have the money is still being intellectually stimulated in ways that she may not be. So I really appreciate you talking through that. That was really cool. I want to read, I'm sort of doing a mix between the questions I have and some of the really good questions that are coming in. Someone asks about the theater world. The theater world is made up of people of all ages, but still ageist. What tools might be available to address this? I know this is important for a lot of people that are listening today.
It certainly is. I just happen to see, I know it's your job to monitor the chat, bless you. But Ashton is preaching to the choir. What are the solutions? So I'm
yeah, Ashton, I'll look at the questions. You focus on what. No, I'm kidding.
Job. You're doing your
no,
job.
No, it's okay.
But again, because on my blog, I have written about all these things, I stuck another blog post in, which is it's a post on, if you want to help end ageism, here are some starting points.
Okay.
I feel like anyone who is involved in the women's movement, and I think we probably have close to 100% saturation on this call, knows a lot about addressing gender bias. And of course, age bias is different, but much of what we know about addressing any form of systemic bias is applicable to age and aging. And in fact, with ageism, as you said in the beginning, reading my book, you have both like it's blindingly obvious and also really new ideas, what my son's girlfriend called no shit, oh shit moments. Oh, why didn't I think of this? So that makes it really kind of gratifying to address age because these are new ideas to most people.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know who it was. Was it some famous feminist? Help me out here. Who said all change starts within? It was probably Buddha or Gandhi. But with all bias, it's important to look at our complicity in it. And because age is so unexamined, the first and most necessary and most uncomfortable step is looking at your own attitudes towards age and aging, because we are all ageist, just as we're all racist. And I think we're all sexist in certain ways, no one escapes bias, but we can't do anything about bias unless we acknowledge it. This, of course, is what consciousness raising did. Women came together and compared stories and realized that what they were experiencing in terms of sexism, discrimination, harassment, you name it, were not individual failures or problems, but widely shared social and economic problems that we could come together and do something about. And that is analogous to the movement against ageism. It's why I started the Old School Clearinghouse. I thought, with two other people, I thought, wouldn't it have been great if the women's movement had one central place? The anti-ageism movement is new, right? That's good and that's bad. We got some ground to catch up on. But if there was one place where you could find all the best tools, videos, webinars, speakers, to educate yourself about ageism. There's I think almost 400 resources on Old School. So noodle around oldschool.info.
Right.
Everything is free except the books. But the two things, we make our own tools, the Old School team, and we have a guide called Who Me Ageist. And if you search for Who Me, you'll see, or we call them consciousness raising guides, which is how to look at your own ageism. And we have Ageist Racist Who Me, which looks at the intersection of ageism and racism. And we have Ageist Sexist Who Me. Free downloads, repurpose them, steal from them, appropriate them, hire us to give them, or just do it yourself. We have a firm fly, be free, ethos here, and apply everything, starting a consciousness raising group is a big ask, but bring some women together and talk about age.
As Honor Roll is doing right now,
which is fantastic, and try and make it a group of of all ages, and ideally mix it up in terms of race and background and sexual orientation and blah blah blah.
This is kind of a follow-up to that. How do you call out or draw attention? It's a question someone sent in to ageism, let's say in the creative arts or in any field, without feeling like a victim and or being paralyzed by it and or being punished for it?
That is a great question. That is a great question. I used to be more ham-handed answering versions of it until I became more aware, of course, that the stakes are different for different people in different situations. If it's your boss who's just said something ageist and you got hired 2 weeks ago and you don't want to lose your job, it's probably not the wisest move to say, yo, you just said something really ageist. So it depends on the circumstance. I learned a lot about this doing more work around anti-racist stuff in when the Black Lives Matter stuff was happening in the beginning of the pandemic. And what we know about addressing things, about acknowledging microaggressions, about being a good ally around race, all those tactics also apply to age bias or to any form of bias. So we have more tools than we think we do. If we stay quiet, nothing changes. If you can, and it does, of course, depend on the specific circumstance. One thing that's pretty low bar, maybe, and maybe it's not, and don't beat yourself up if you don't do it, because it takes courage and it is uncomfortable. Culture change doesn't happen without discomfort, is just to point out the absence of age diversity. If everyone in the room is the same age, how come? Most of us notice now if it's everyone's white or if everyone's male. So just by hitching age to the intersectional sled in that way, you are doing something. Is age part of the DEI, conversation in your company? That's more of a corporate thing, and it's still not that on that agenda. And I don't think most of you are big, corporate players, but make sure it's there. And a really useful all-purpose way to address an ageist or racist or whateverist comment is to say, because you can never think of the clever thing to say until the morning after, or you're lying in bed that night twisting and turning about it, is, what do you mean by that? Or tell me more, or what's your reasoning there? Not in a snarky gotcha kind of way, but because you do want the person to explain their thinking. And I'll stop there on that. But we have the tools. We have so many tools.
Those are gentle, if pardon the expression, ways to keep a conversation going where you're not where maybe I'll speak of my own, anger or rage or whatnot can be funneled in a way to get more information.
If you put someone on the defensive, it doesn't go anywhere. Tempting though it is, repeatedly.
It's funny. Sex is a very powerful tool. And one of the things that gets sort of lobbed at those of us as we get older is we're not as sexy. And how can we kind of reframe that notion? I don't think I'm wrong in saying that. I don't think it's true, but it sure does seem.
Yeah, it is the narrative.
Yeah.
And I've gotten called out on this too, which is useful, from someone saying, it's, you don't mention asexuality as an option. So I think it's really important to say there are loads of people who are asexual, or older people who decide, men and women, that they're going to put that energy elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And there's not only nothing wrong, I would have gotten a lot more done in life if I didn't devote so much energy to trying to get laid. I'll just come right out and say it. So it's important, being sexually active is another sort of capitalist and consumerist notion of sort of doing it well or succeeding. So I want to knock that off the table, qualify what I'm about to say. If you look at your friends who are sexually active, they are not the thinnest. They are not the palest, the whitest. They are not the youngest. They are the women who know their lovers are lucky. And that is because those people have succeeded. Some people are more impervious to it than others, but in beating back this ugly, misogynist, consumer-driven narrative that in order to be attractive, you have to weigh 6 pounds, and be, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It is, I sometimes I don't want to put it in win-lose. I have those moments. This morning was one of them where I put on a little makeup and I'm like, hey, this is a big job. None of us are immune to that. But if you are, one of the most helpful things someone said to me at the very beginning of this journey, and one of my best experiences as a public speaker was a panel at an arts organization where anytime someone said the word journey, everyone had to take a shot. So if you learn, take nothing else out of tonight, I bequeath you, think of taking a shot every time you hear the word journey. And now I've totally lost the track of how I was going to.
No, we're talking about sex, and I appreciate what you're saying. I mean, and that real people really know how to enjoy themselves, and they don't look like what you see. But I have to push back a little bit because the images are so pervasive; they're everywhere.
Well,
I mean, this is how I reacted to a recent cover. I think it was of Allure magazine with Jennifer Aniston, who looked like she had work done in a bikini that just barely covered her breasts. And I found the whole thing I just ripped it off and tore it while I was standing in line waiting for something else. And people looked at me as though I was crazy, but it just
like the wrong way.
Yeah. What could I do to calm down?
Well, Allure famously banned the term anti-aging.
They did, which I really appreciate.
3 or 4 years ago, which they did. The very next sentence linked to an ad for Retin-A, which I thought was funny, but still progress is progress. And this sounds really saccharine, but we do need to commend the people who are making progress. You can write Allure and say, your cover sucks, and here's why I don't like it. We older people have enormous purchasing power, and women have less assets than men because of the gender wage gap and other things, not news to anyone at this event, but we do more household spending. We have enormous purchasing power, right? So we can spend that. Letters to the editor, people write them, people read them. I see real movement in Hollywood around the presence and visibility of older actors. There are a ton of them now that are speaking out. Naomi Watts, Gina Davis has forever. There is the silence around. Look at all the older women who did pretty well at the was it the Golden Globe that just happened?
I think yes, or the Critics' Choice Awards, one of them.
So it is changing. How do we reward the people and the entities that are recognizing and valuing older women? This only happens when a lot of us do it, but it does work. There was a travel company that did this horrible ad for Thanksgiving travel. No need to book in our hotels. No need to stay in grandma's creepy basement. And I also have a blog called Yo, Is This Ageist? And someone sent it in, and I posted something about it, and I put it also on my Facebook page and tagged the company. And the company wrote within 12 hours and said, we're sorry. We didn't realize it was icky, and we won't do this anymore.
Wow.
So, I know this is like saying an ant is, changing the Himalayas, but, obviously the women's movement is a powerful example. We have not closed the pay gap. We do not have equity in healthcare. It's a million other things, but we have come a long way. And one reason the pushback is so intense right now is because we are actually started to, threaten people in power. That's a sign of progress. And, all those tactics just about are applicable to this movement too.
Right. And understanding the power of our dollars. I mean, I guess when it comes to culture, if we put money in the projects and we attend and we support the projects that reflect what we're talking about, then maybe more of them will be done.
And I think, around about sex again, I think it, and I do not mean, I just, there's so many voices telling women what we should do and should look like and should say. But I often suggest to women, if they want to remain sexually active, to consider dating younger men. Because yes, there are younger men who fetishize older women, and no one wants to be an object or whatever. But there are lots of younger men who are, interested. It might not be the person, you know, grow old with, but it might be, you never know. So to open up your mind and not assume that a younger man won't find you attractive, for one thing. And I don't know why I'm putting this in entirely heteronormative terms. I'm sorry. I know that gay culture, gay lesbian culture, my daughter is 38 and she says, Mom, she's a lesbian. She calls herself a lesbian. She says, Mom, no one's a lesbian anymore. She said, it's like identifying as an Oldsmobile. It's so like everyone's queer now. But that age gaps in lesbian relationships are generally more tolerated than in hetero ones because of the premium on women's, I think, reproductive capacity, blah, blah. But open your mind up to dating a broader range of age range of people.
All right, that's a good thing. Now, I'm going to ask you, now I want to just announce to everybody the way we had originally conceptualize this. Ashton and I were going to talk. We're going to, talk to each other, and then I was going to open things up to questions. But your questions have been so fast and furious and coming along that I've been just incorporating
or younger
in the
women.
conversation.
Exactly, Susan Miller. Thank you. I apologize for being so hetero about it.
Oh, you got somebody wrote you. Okay. Let me just ask you this, because we talked a little bit about how our money can help speak, and someone questioned, how do we convince theater, and I would extend this to film, television, to provide aging playwrights with targeted opportunities when theater, et cetera, is absolutely 100% chasing the Gen Z dollar. They really want to get that money, not what are they saying? But Gen Z are openly and even proudly ageist, people who say, hey, boomer, in that sort of dismissive way. And this person put in caps, we're not fashionable to support. So how do you combat that? Even when we've got the dollars, but the perception is it's the younger money that's wanted more somehow.
That I know it drives me nuts when museums here will have like an open night for, people under 40 or whatever. It's probably illegal for starters. It depends on the theater, but that is ageist and it is discriminatory, and they've probably never even thought about it. It's probably never even crossed their minds. So one thing you can do is, of course, to call it out in a gentle way. I mean, not a gentle way. It's really hard not to be angry and furious. But but to say, gee, have you considered that this might be alienating to your older members? And here are 6 women playwrights who do fantastic work. So, or, here are 6, fascinating events that lots of older people would come to, propose, I'll point out what they're doing wrong and what they're losing.
Mm-hmm.
And suggest alternatives. I just want to point out that the way that question is framed is, I am on many tears. One of which is to try to get people to stop using generational labels entirely. We are addicted to them. We love them. They are convenient. They give us a sense of identity. We love to put things in buckets, but no comment about millions and millions of people born roughly around the same age could possibly be accurate. So it fosters stereotyping, and it fosters us versus them framing, right? I mean, scientists don't agree on what a generation is, except in the narrow sense that my daughter is a different generation from me. And the minute we, marketers love it and demographers love it, but it fosters the idea of generational conflict. And there is no evidence whatsoever that old people don't care about young people or young people don't care about old people. I don't know how old the person was who came up with OK Boomer, but it didn't go very far. And not all Gen Z people are anything, let alone ageist. So a substitute for that is just talk about younger people or older people instead of sticking a label on it, because it stereotypes and it's not helpful. We just fall into right away thinking some article we read about Gen Z and sticking a bunch of traits on it that are necessarily stereotyping.
So these may be false constructs, or they really are, because we're not monolithic.
They could not possibly be true.
Right. Human beings are not monolithic. I mean, we can think all kinds of ways and do things all kinds of different ways.
Absolutely. And heterogeneity increases with age.
Well, and here's the thing. So my next question is going to completely blow that apart.
Ladies,
Oh,
can
do
you
we
hear
have
me?
to?
It's Olga.
Yes. Oh, it's
I
Olga.
just, I
Oh,
want to
dear.
be respectful of
Uh-oh.
Ashton's time.
Oh, Ashton, I
So
apologize.
if
didn't
you
even
want to
notice.
continue, if you want to continue a little bit longer, that's perfectly fine. But we said it would be an hour, but I know it's a great talk, but I just wanted to mention that. So maybe,
Why don't
Okay.
we go?
We can wrap it up. I had two more questions.
yeah, no
And then,
problem.
one is kind of violates what I just said. I'm wondering whether the idea,
That's always a good sign.
whether this whole the ageism movement has come about because baby boomers are getting older, and we've been accused in many ways of examining our own navels, and this is what's happening to us. So this
Nancy, I
needs
have
to be-
had exactly the same thought.
I-
So
what do you
I
think?
hereby, the Pope of Ageism, absolve you of your sin. I
Thank
am
you
no
so much.
expert. My experience is just, I mean, I am an expert, but my experience and your experiences are different. I was born in 1952, dead center of the post-war baby boom. I try not to use the word boomer for all the reasons I said. And also to me, it has class connotations that I don't love, but maybe not to you, it depends. But I do think it is because this massive generation of people, there I used it, it came out of my mouth. So this massive group has had such sway over popular culture for so many years. We invented youth culture. We invented don't trust anyone over 30. And it has come back to bite us in the ass for sure.
Wow.
And the best reason I have for why it's gaining momentum is that it has dawned on people around my age, that this getting old thing is happening to us. And I want to say that the movement is gaining speed and power and traction. I mean, ageism was in so many more headlines and conversations last year than ever before. The old school clearinghouse didn't have a campaigns section when we started it, launched it in 2018. And now there's 35 or almost 40. England would be the next up, having the second or third national anti-ageism campaign. So it is happening.
That's great. And I guess the last question I want to ask has to do with our president, who is an older man. And what are your thoughts about people who feel like maybe he's too old to be president? He's gotten a lot of criticism. He was a stutterer. So sometimes I think his searching for words isn't because he's addle-brained or something like that. It's just that's what people with that speech pattern do. But even progressive friends of mine, even diehard Democrats are like, he's old. What are your thoughts?
So this is something I've written about a lot. I just posted a link in the chat, which links to a guest post. I do those occasionally by a journalist who goes into in detail why the journalism around this subject, and you know a lot, so one or two things about that, is lazy. It is no more okay to say that you are too old for something than that you are too female for something, or you are too Black for something, or you are too disabled for something. It's not okay. He may be too, he may be too diminished. He may be not healthy enough. I think his age is real. Age is real. It's not that you can't bring it up, right? It is, of course, a concern with health with someone that old. I think every candidate for everything should have a physical, and we all have the right to see it. But when we say someone is too old for something, except if it's a child, I mean, a 2-year-old is too old to ride a motorcycle. Once you are an adult, whenever that happens,
too young to ride a motorcycle. Sorry,
too young. Sorry, right. But beyond that, when we think, and I'll leave you with this last little exercise as a way to get started. And sorry, I'm sure you've all already started on this, or you wouldn't even be having me here and be doing the amazing things your group does. But think about how you use the words old and young in this context. I hear people say, I don't feel old, right? What they really mean is, I don't feel invisible. I don't feel incompetent. I don't feel stupid. And I felt all those things at 13, worse than I ever felt them in later life, right? You may be too smart to do something. You may be too out of shape to do something. There are a million reasons you do or don't want to do something. Age is never the reason, because people your same age do or don't do them, right? It's never about age in that sense.
Wow, that's a great place to end. I thank you so much. I know that we're recording this conversation, so I would gather that honor roll people or whomever, Olga could speak to this, will be able to listen to this conversation again. I hope there's a way to save the chat,
Yes,
because there were so
yes.
many great questions.
There
What did you say?
is, like right at the bottom of the
Yeah.
chat where
Uh-huh.
you start to write a new message, you'll see 3 dots
Three
all the
dots.
way over on
Oh, I
the
see them.
right,
Okay.
and just click
Save
that
chat.
and you will get saved.
Great.
Thank you so much. This has
Thank
been
you, everyone. Yeah, please send
Ashton
the
and
links to people.
yeah, and
Nancy, it was so
Nancy,
great
thank
to
you
meet
so
you.
much. It's been
Ashton,
amazing.
what a pleasure. Everybody, for your questions. Thank you for setting this up. I thank Honor Roll, and I would highly recommend, if you haven't seen Ashton's TED Talk, it is a mind blower. So check that out and read all of her stuff and
so
join
much.
all of her things.
Thank you.
Very nice to
Okay.
meet you all.
Thanks,
Bye.
ladies.
Ciao.
Bye. Good night.
Bye. Thank you. Thanks, Nancy.